This is R2D Tech and we're back again with another video today about the Infinix Note 7, so stay tuned. So the Infinix Note 7 is another great budget option if you're looking for a phone under £200. It has great specs, great design. However, there are a few downfalls which we'll get into later. So firstly, let's talk about the design. The phone comes in 3 different colors. You get either forest green, ether black, or Bolivia blue. There is also a kind of a geometric pattern on the back, which personally I'm not a fan of, but then again, if you're just going to stick a case on the phone, it doesn't really matter that much. The back and frame are both made out of plastic, which is kind of unfortunate, but to be honest, that's kind of standard on almost all budget phones. I would advise sticking a case on this phone if you don't want any scratches. Now onto the front of the phone, you get a massive 6.95-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p. Now the resolution especially is a little disappointing, but again, it is a budget phone which is £200, so just bear that in mind for the whole video. There is also a hole punch cutout for the selfie camera on the top left of the display. So moving on to the specs on this phone, in terms of the processor, you get a MediaTek Helio G70, and that will have similar performance to many of the mid-range Snapdragon processors. It should be fine for everyday tasks, but obviously it won't be as snappy as you would find on many of the premium smartphones out there. For RAM and storage, you can either choose from 64 gigs with 4 gigs of RAM or 128 gigs with 4 or 6 gigs of RAM. 4 gigs of RAM should be okay if you're not a heavy user of your phone. However, you might want to opt for the 6 gigs of RAM if you want to future-proof your phone or if you're a heavy user. You'll just find that some of the time you'll be able to reopen apps much faster because they're still held in the memory. There is also a dedicated micro SD card slot if you want to upgrade that storage. However, if you're using cloud services such as Google Photos and Google Drive, you probably don't need that much storage on your phone. It is nice to have the option, however. For the battery, you get a 5000 mAh battery, and that should get you a pretty massive battery life, especially when you're considering that the display is only 720p, so that is also an advantage of having a lower resolution. If you're not a heavy user of your phone, you could see that battery life last a few days if you're lucky. To go with the battery, there is also 18-watt fast charging, and that fast charger is included in the box, which is really nice to see. Even a lot of the premium smartphone manufacturers don't give you the fast charger in the box, so it's nice to see that some of the budget options do. Let's move on to the cameras. So cameras have always been one of the areas where budget smartphones have kind of suffered a lot. So on the rear of this phone, you get a quad lens setup with a 48 megapixel wide lens, a 2 megapixel depth sensor, a 2 megapixel macro lens, and also a 2 megapixel dedicated video lens. Firstly, talking about that 48 megapixel wide lens, that number does sound pretty impressive. However, as we know, the numbers don't always show the full story. What's more important is the processing that goes on after you've taken the photo to adjust the colors. This phone does an okay job. It's much better than many of the other budget phones we've seen. However, it's still not to the standard of the premium smartphones, and to be honest, you can't really expect it to be. It is nice to have the option of a macro lens, which might be useful if you're taking many up-close shots. It definitely does a very good job at focusing when you're really close to a subject. In terms of video quality, this phone will only shoot up to 1080p at 30 frames per second. That's kind of a bit of surprise considering that there is a dedicated video lens. You would have expected it to be a little bit better. However, it's 1080p at 30 frames per second, and it's not very good, to be honest. The video stabilization isn't very good and it just kind of looks a bit stuttery when you're filming. For the selfie camera, you get a 16 megapixel lens and it should be fine for most people. In terms of the software on this phone, it is running Android 10 and it is a pretty stock version of Android as well. That's probably my favorite part of this phone. In my opinion, every Android phone should just have stock Android. It looks a lot cleaner to many of the other budget phones which are running various skins from different companies. The downside of getting many of these lesser known budget phones is that they probably won't see future updates of Android from Google very quickly. That's kind of annoying. However, if you're not someone who cares about the newest features of Android, then it shouldn't really matter that much. Many people will be glad to hear that this phone does come with a headphone jack, which is nice to see on a phone in 2020. However, the downside of this phone is that it is still using micro USB, which is pretty ancient, to be honest. We shouldn't be seeing it in 2020, and for many people, it will be a deal breaker. Almost everyone nowadays is using USB-C, apart from Apple, of course, and all the accessories you might get for your phone will probably also charge with USB-C. So it is really annoying that they've chosen to go with micro USB. Personally, that's kind of a deal breaker for me. For security, you do get a side-mounted fingerprint sensor, which is really fast and accurate, gets you in every time, and you also get a face unlock feature using that selfie camera if you don't want to use the fingerprint sensor, and it's also really fast and accurate. So that's kind of it for this phone. It's got a great design, great specs for the price, and if you're not someone who cares about having mediocre camera quality and still having micro USB, then it's a great option. Yeah. That's it from this video. If you liked it, please press the thumbs up button. If you loved it, please consider subscribing. Thanks.